Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our course breakdown for this week's PGA Championship. It's the first ever major I was able to go to there when Phil won the PGA at Kiawah Island, so there's a soft place in my heart for this tournament. And this week we head back to Oak Hill, one of the more prominent, one of the more iconic venues in all of professional golf. It has been recently restored by Andrew Green to be even more resemblant of its original design by Donald Ross. So a little bit of a few nuances, a few differences to take a look at with the track this year, and I think it's going to be an absolute bear for these players. In 2003 for the PGA, the cut line was 9 over par. In 2013, your winner Jason Duffner was just -10 for the week, and with added length to the course, added some contouring, made the bunkers a little bit more penal. It's going to be everything that these players could ask for from a test. So here in this video, going to break down everything you need to know about Oak Hill Country Club, the East Course. So go out there, make your PGA DFS plays, and also fire on some outright bets. But go through this course specifics, go through a hole-by-hole breakdown of the shots required around Oak Hill, and then towards the end, bring you the key stats and comp courses that you'll need to go out there and do your modeling. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get this thing started. Rochester, New York, that's the home for Oak Hill Country Club, and it's going to be a week for the Bombers. This is a course that has seen a bunch of changes since it was last played in major championship golf, and now it's set up for the modern game. So par 70, nearly 7,400 yards, and it's going to have some nasty rough, like we see at most PGA Championships or US Opens. So the 4,500 square foot greens, the tight fairways, long rough. I already mentioned that Andrew Green came in, made the greens more difficult, the around the green shots, bunkers, even more penal than before. You might see a winning score in the -5 or worse range. I mean, actually, when we saw the 2003 PGA Championship, only 3 players broke par the entire week. And when Jack Nicklaus played here back in the early 80s, I believe, he was the only player in the field to go out there and break par. And that was before the lengthening of the course, before the fact that they went out there and restored the greens to the normal Donald Ross design. It might make it easier, might make it more difficult. There's still a lot of unknown out there, but at least from what I'm seeing, I'm expecting this thing to play unbelievably difficult. So let's talk about the ball striking perspective. I already mentioned thin fairways, long rough, and then the greens being small, firm, and fast. You're going to have to be pinpoint accurate to keep yourself in play, whether it's off the tee, staying out of the rough, being able to control your spin, set up angles into these tiny green complexes, or of course, making sure that you can hold these green complexes with some of your iron shots. So long and straight off the tee is going to be extremely useful, but also extremely accurate in high ball flights into greens. Guys like Rory McIlroy, Jason Day that hit the ball extremely high up into the air. Adam Scott also fits that same sort of description, are the kind of players that are going to be able to get the ball close to some of these tricky pin locations. And if you take a look at the leaderboard from 2013, all 3 of those players finished in the top 15 of that event. I believe actually all 3 of them finished in the top 10 of that golf tournament, given they were some of the best players during that time period. So that should be expected, of course. It's worth noting that that high ball flight did translate to success. If you look at the leaderboard, there's a few shorter hitters that got it done with the accuracy there in 2013, but with the added distance to the scorecard, I really do think that distance is going to be an even bigger factor this time around. And based on some of the sources from Oak Hill, so No Laying Up is on there on site, they've asked a few players about the golf course, and every single one has reportedly said that distance is going to be a massive factor around here. So in the past, maybe with the shorter setup around Oak Hill, some of the shorter hitters could get the ball done. But this week, it's looking like those off the tee players are really going to get a huge advantage. And then those high ball flights into greens might also be what you're looking for. In terms of scoring averages, we're just looking at the 2003 and 2013 PGA Championships. Scoring average was over 3.4 over par. So extremely difficult. That's why you saw the cut line get to like +6, +9 over those 2 years. But also, you're only making 2.4 birdies per round. So it's an extremely difficult course. You're trying to go out there, make a bunch of pars. That's going to get you a ton of strokes to the field. I mean, you're going to make a ton of bogeys. 4.84 per round, in fact, which is by far the most difficult course that I have in my database at this point. So you're looking for players that can save par, keep themselves in position, and that can be strategic. I mean, Tiger Woods in his prime, this would be the perfect golf course for him, right? He can gain off the tee, can launch those shots shots up into the air and get them to sit softly on the greens. And there's not a smarter player in golf history, in my opinion. Maybe Jack Nicklaus has something to say about that in terms of his course management. That's the kind of player that we're looking for. Experience, high-level ball striker that can go out there and save par when necessary. A few other things to note. So it is a original Donald Ross design. The renovation was done by Andrew Green in 2019. The entire focus was to take the golf course that had changed a bunch over the years, had a few renovations, and bring it back to its original design, the whole way back from 1926. So there's been added distance to try and modernize it, but all of the contouring, all of the slopes, all of the bunkering is very resemblant of a Donald Ross design. So if you want to look at some of the other Donald Ross designs around the tour, right, try and find some comps, I think that's a really good idea, because this is going to be as Donald Ross of a Donald Ross design as you can get, right? Like it's going to be exactly on par for what you expect there. There's only one water hazard in play. That's also very common of a Donald Ross design. He didn't try and force in a bunch of water to a lot of his setups, but that one water hazard does span 6 different holes. It's a creek. It meanders around a bunch of holes. Sometimes it runs the entire way up a fairway and up next to the greens. So just another, drop in the bucket for Andrew Green there. Did a really good job of working around the river, the creek that's out there as well. Your rough is a fescue Kentucky bluegrass ryegrass mix. So it's very, typical for this part of the country. It's mostly that Kentucky bluegrass, and everything else is bent grass. You've got bent greens, bent fairways. Part of the fairways are bent / POA, which is also extremely common for this part of the country. A very similar agronomy setup to what we had at Brookline last year for the U.S. Open, where we had those bent greens, we had those bent POA fairways. So a lot of similarities that you can take between those two golf courses. The other thing to note here is that during the restoration, they took the POA Anua out of the greens. So in 2003, 2013, these were a bent POA surface. You still have the bent POA in some of the fairways, like I was mentioning before, but the greens are now just a pure velvet bent grass. So if you're looking at some of the putting numbers, you're trying to find some of the specialists on these greens, you're going to want to be looking at just good old regular bent grass for that. And now to take a look at this hole by hole. This is an absolute bear. Hole number 1, 464. And these fairway bunkers to the left are placed perfectly. They'll be in almost every Tour Pros landing zone. And if you hit it into the bunkers, most of the time you're going to have to lay up, because these have extremely steep faces, as all the bunkers do around property, especially after the renovation. So getting the ball over this little creek, which this is one of the holes that you see that creek on, is dicey. You're not going to get it done every single time. So most players here are going to prioritize just hitting the short stuff, maybe missing to the right over here where you have a little bit more room, and trying to get up and down with a par. Now these greens, I'm going to just point it out right now, a lot of them are square in shape. It's very typical of an old Donald Ross kind of green, and it opens up a lot of interesting pin locations towards the corners. So just keep an eye on that for most of the holes. Hole 2 is one of the easier on property. In fact, some would say that this is the easiest hole on property, and take advantage of it. I'll say that, because don't get used to these easy holes. Relatively large landing area. Most players are going to lay well back off the tee, still set themselves up with probably a 9-iron in, and you want to take advantage of this birdie look, because it is by far as easy as it's going to get. Hole 3 is 233. It is a par 3 to a tiny surface. It is nearly impossible to hit this green if it's going to be firm and fast. So good luck out there in hole 3. Hole 4 is a par 5, but it's 621 yards. Good luck reaching in 2, and even if you get it up near the surface in 2, good luck trying to access some of these really difficult pin locations. I mean, this one's not really the square shape I was talking about before, but you can see it's got a really awkward, little corners to it, which bring in extremely difficult pin locations. Hole 5 is 182. This is the old 6th hole that they had here on property. This was renovated, recently added to be an exact replica of what Donald Ross had here before. So back here on the left, this was an old bunker. You can see it was hollowed out, made into a chipping area. And these bunkers, just like all of them on property, are extremely penal. So hard to hit green, and if you miss, you're going to be penalized for it heavily. Hole 6 is probably the most difficult hole on the entire property. It's 514 yards. This is the original hole, but lengthened 60 yards. So back in the day for the old PGAs, US Opens and whatnot, they play from way up here, but they've added a tee box the whole way back near the road that makes this 514 yards. You've got the creek in play on the right, natural area just over the creek, which is even worse than being in here because it's not, I believe you don't get to take a drop if you hit it over there on the other side of the red line. And of course, the river goes the whole way up to the green complex. The old green was back here. You can actually see the shape of it there. It's been turned into a fairway, and they added even more distance by going and packing it into the corner. So extremely difficult hole. You're going to see a ton of double bogeys there, even some triples. Hole 7 is 465. You also got the creek on the right side. Another hole where you need to be long and accurate off the tee. If you bail out to the left, you're likely going to be cut off by a few of those overhanging oaks. So another hole where if you don't hit the center of the fairway, well, you're probably scrambling to make a bogey at that point. Hole 8 is 434. It's another one of the quote-unquote easy holes on property, but you still can't fall asleep off the tee. You got those two bunkers in the landing zone. You have to be accurate and long here. And if you were, bail out in either direction, well, there's oak trees to cause you trouble there too. Hole 9 is 479, dogleg from left to right. This fairway is extremely sloped from right to left. So if you were to land it on this little candy cane out there, there's a good chance you miss in the rough to the left. So this is an extremely difficult tee shot. As the fairway slopes in one direction, the hole goes the other direction to the right. So another difficult one. Hole 10, another one of the quote-unquote easy holes out there. So you really want to take advantage here. If you can make a birdie on hole number 10, you're going to be happy, and you need it because almost every other hole's nearly impossible to birdie. I mean, 11's one of those. 248. Good luck making a birdie here, especially to this back left pin location that we're likely to see on Sunday. Hole 12 is 400 yards. It's another one of those birdie looks that you have to take advantage of. One of the only 4 on site. And these aren't just guaranteed birdie looks, right? You still got to hit the fairway with a long iron here. You can't be blocking yourself out. And then these pin locations, especially towards the edges, you can see everything runs off there as well. This front also has a little bit of a false front aspect to it. They're still difficult wedge shots. Hole 13 is a 600-yard par 5. You are almost forced to lay up here, though. So you can see 285 yards gets you just in front of the creek. To carry the creek, it's like 310, 320. To carry the creek here. And even your Rory McIlroys, your Bryson DeChambeau's might not have it in the bag, right? Unless it's downwind. So this is almost a forced 3-shotter where you have to go into it with a wedge. But I suppose if you are one of those super long players, you want to take on that creek, have at it. That'll be an interesting little risk reward aspect. Hole 14 is a quote unquote drivable par 4. I'm going to be interested to see how people play this. I think there's a chance that people just bomb it up near the green, try and get up and down for a birdie. But I also think that a lot of people are going to try and lay up. Like a Justin Thomas has a lot of belief in those wedges, right? Those little feel shots from like 80, 90 yards. It'll be interesting to see. I don't know how everyone's going to attack it. Hole 15 is 183, box-shaped green. It looks like a little hourglass out there and extremely difficult to hit, as you can imagine. I mean, with how small the surface is. Hole 16 is 462, straightaway par 4, but a bunch of trees in play on the left that can block you out. Another difficult hole to get up and down if you miss in this bunker. Hole 17 is 508 yards, dogleg from left to right. Another fairway that campers to the left, even though the whole dog legs to the right, so that one's real difficult. You can see the old green was right here. They added one a little bit further back to, again, add some distance. And hole 18 is a 500-yard par 4. These bunkers to the right are an automatic layup if you end up in them. And if you miss out here to the left, you might be blocked out into the green that way. So just another difficult tee shot, another dog leg to the right. If there's one thing to notice here is that most of the dog legs do go to the right direction. So if there's going to be a ball flight that I'm looking for this week, it's most likely a fade. Somebody that can move it from left to right and try and hold some of those fairways. And now for some key stats at Oak Hill. First off, we've got shots gained approach, which is almost always going to be number 1, especially for a major championship kind of setup where you're going to be penalized heavily for any miss into a green complex. But at Oak Hill, we're mostly looking at those mid to long irons. There's a few holes where you have wedges in hand, but a majority of the shots you're going to give back to the field are on those 470 to 500 plus yard par 4s. So just like the last few weeks where some of these longer par 71s have brought in those long iron shots, you're going to see that this week on almost all all of the par threes, and then especially on those harder to hit par fours. So if you're going to specialize on any approach buckets, take a look at that 175 to 200 yard range, maybe that 200 to 225 yard range. But in general, the best iron players are some of the more consistent players in the world. So you want to be considering that pretty much any week anyways. Next up, we've got shots gained around the green. And a lot of this is based on how hard the greens are to hit, right? It's even longer this time around, so you're going to add more difficulty there. The rough is gnarly. And then you've had the renovation, which adds a lot of that exterior contouring, which in the past, especially with some of the buildup around the greens, might have made the greens a little bit easier to hit. As part of the renovation, Andrew Green restored the contouring, the natural contouring that was there before, which is not going to help players, right? Rather than it building up around the edges, they've all been shaved off. There's in fact slopes that are going to work balls off of greens this time around. So expect greens to be harder to hit, and they were already hard to hit at about a 55% clip. And the around the green shots, with how deep the bunkers are, with how deep the rough is going to be, are going to be some of the most difficult all year. So the players that can save par the most often, keep par on the scorecard, are likely going to find themselves towards the top of the leaderboard. And lastly, they've got shots gained off the tee, which you've heard the quotes from the players. You've heard that 320 yards is almost a prerequisite when it comes to your carry distance. But furthermore, we want to be looking at guys that are accurate. You look at the 2013 leaderboard, some of the more plotter, more accurate guys did find success that year, most notably like a Jason Duffner, right? He's not a bomber by any means, but you also need guys this time around that can take advantage of a 7,400 yard par 70, that can take advantage of some of those longer par threes. So shots gained off the tee, looking at club head speed, I think is going to be a huge factor. I've already heard a few players mention that it's a little bit like winged foot, where as long as you're bombing it a long way, you can get away with it, because the club head speed is not only going to come into play with your off the tee shot, right? How close you can get to the hole, but also if you're trying to hit out of the rough. Those higher club speed players are able to get through that gnarly rough, still hit some of these greens, still launch the ball way up into the air and hold them. And that's how Bryson took home that US Open right there at good old Winged Foot. Another long classical design that had a lot of added distance since the last time it was played. So those are a few stats to consider. A few things that I'm adding here: shots gained at major championships. That's going to be a huge part of my poll this week. I think experience is going to play a huge factor. Taking a look at just club head speed, actually adding that into my modeling. Taking a look at shots gained at golden age designs. So trying to take a look at some of the more strategic golf courses over the last 100 or so years. I think that's going to be helpful. And then, of course, taking a look at our shots gained at comp courses, which we're going to break down right now. Our first comp this week is going to be Pinehurst number 2, the home of a ton of US Opens and an anchor site for them, in another Donald Ross design. It's a little bit different from the visual perspective. A lot of trees around Pinehurst. Oak Hill used to be that same kind of way, but ever since the renovation, a lot of those trees have since been removed. But what I want to focus on here are the really difficult around the green shots and the difficult to hit greens. Now at Pinehurst, you don't really have that same kind of gnarly rough as what you're going to get this week here at Oak Hill, but still extremely slick greens that have a lot of runoff areas. So I don't think it's a perfect comp. I think that the play styles are a little bit different, but the contouring, the around the green shots are very similar because they're both Donald Ross designs. They're both difficult tracks that you see under major championships. And I think the playing style, especially when you get on and around the greens, is going to be extremely comparable. So taking a look at that at number 1, you can look at some of those US Opens, some of the leaderboards, and I think find a lot of success. At number 2, we've got East Lake Golf Club, another Donald Ross, the home of the Tour Championship. And though it's a little bit more modern, right, it's not one of those, golden age designs anymore because it's had so many changes. It's a ball striking test, par 70, that's extremely long. And once again, it still has that Donald Ross imprint on it, right? Now, it might not be as perfect as maybe a Pinehurst number 2. It's seen less changes over the years than what you've seen at East Lake, but I like the fact that you've got the long rough at East Lake, right? It's a little bit more similar from the visual perspective. You've got some trees out there. You've got some holes that are wide open, a little bit more water around in East Lake, but we see it more often. We have a lot of shots gained data that we can take from East Lake, as opposed to something like a US Open, which also makes it extremely, extremely valuable and useful for our modeling. And lastly, we've got Aronimink Golf Club, the home of the BMW Championship 2018 and a few PGA Championships over the years. Now, we don't have a ton of data here. We have a few data points, but from the comparison perspective, it's almost a perfect comp. You've got yourselves very similar from the visual perspective, almost the same agronomy. It's another Donald Ross design that's extremely difficult on and around the greens. It's relatively long. It's a par 70. It checks a lot of the same boxes that an East Lake does, except that it's a little bit more of an old timers kind of course, right? It's a little bit closer to the golden age than some of the other courses. A lot of the recent renovations over the last 10, 15 years at Aronimink have been made to kind of resemble its original design, which is just what we're getting here at Oak Hill Country Club this time around. So not a ton of data, right? Unlike an East Lake Golf Club. I mean, even Pinehurst, we have a little bit more data from than what we do at Aronimink. But based on, I've played Aronimink before. I know how it plays. It's going to play extremely similar to what we're going to get at Oak Hill. I thought it was worth throwing in from that perspective. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for this week's course breakdown. Really looking forward to the second major of the year and seeing who can come out on top. Before you hop on out of here, smash that like button. Also go ahead and comment down below what you've got as the winning score this week. It's gonna be a wide range because there's so many unknowns, but I'm gonna take -6. I think that's probably right around the hot zone, but would love to hear your thoughts down there in the comments. And until next time, best of luck with any of your PGA DFS lineups, any outright bets that you guys decide to go with. We're going to have a ton of content dropping for this huge week. Then also have core plays this afternoon, value plays, our fades and sleepers. Of course, the weekly live stream will be Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. We're doing showdown streams throughout the weekend as well, covering everything that you need to from that perspective to go out there, cash out, and have ourselves a weekend for the major. Best of luck, like I said. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared to go out there, do your research for this week, and let's have ourselves a week here at Oak Hill.